two arguments. One, on how it's just worse for the economy on their side of the house. Two, on how we protect worker rights on our side. Before I go into my two arguments, I'll start off with a few pieces of framing. One, we tell you what does gig economy look like. It probably looks like food delivery. For example, DoorDash. For example, like you get like Uber Eat, right? For example, there's also for example like taxi drivers who drive like taxis, right? That they have like a probably like a flexible like working hours, right? We tell that, but however, we tell that they don't have like any formal protections. It probably looks like that they don't have any insurance, right? Or pension benefits. It probably looks like that they don't have like health insurance. It probably looks like that they just generally don't have compensations when they get like injured when they're trying to in the middle of like making money, right? I think secondly, what does developing countries look like and what do they need? It probably looks like that they need growth in capital, that they need like three things. One, infrastructure, and then like schools and then buildings, etc. I think two, an increase in welfare, and three, that they need like a prominent way to like self-sustain and not to be dependent on on other countries' economies. As a result, I think why do we solve this problem? The alternative that government gives is this is for example we're gonna have like big local companies instead of like using like these foreign companies that these gig economies use. For example, the New York a taxi company, right? It probably that New York taxi company they hire full-time drivers and taxi instead of like drivers that take it as like a part-time job or that have like more flexible working hours. That these companies in like that they are local companies. Thus, the revenue goes like directly to the local industry, which could boost economic growth because that the people need it and because that so many people need this industry that it's just out of necessity. I think it probably also look like on how like the prominence of gig economy. There's just more and more people spending time and working in the gig economy and in the labor force. But the thing is, they don't get like they don't get a good salary payment. And right now, instead, like the salary that they gets it decreased is because that there's just like more and more competition towards it. I think which contributes to like a less which contributes less to like the main economy as well. I think which leads to my first argument on how it's just generally worse for the economy in general. I think reason number one is on how like a lot of gig economies are from like foreign companies. For example, Uber Drive, right? When you Uber a car, like for probably like for example in a country, right? It's usually from like American companies, which this what does this mean? It probably means that the majority of the money, the majority of the income that the Uber driver gets goes to the company instead of goes to themselves. So probably they get like 10% of like the salary that that the money that they actually make, meaning that they don't really that they are vulnerable to this, that they are actually being exploited by these companies, by these foreign companies, is because that they're just not local, and which means that the all of the benefits that the Uber driver gets, like all of the money that the Uber driver gets, it doesn't go to like the local industry. What's even worse is it goes to like foreign industries. I think it's just better on our side since like at least that the money goes to like the local industry and it helps the local industry grow. But we tell you on their side of the house, it's just going to be even worse because the all of the money goes to foreign industries and it helps foreign development instead of your own local development that is actually beneficial to these developing nations. As I have already explained, the alternative of like having big local companies is just more beneficial because the local companies, the revenue goes directly to the local industry, which helps economic growth. Because and also like since people really need it, since people need it out of necessity, so people would still most likely to like prioritize like local industries instead of like these foreign industries, since like just it's more direct, but also it's just out of necessity. I think reason number two is on how it's just unstable is because that they don't have any that they don't have any savings, right? It's because workers have like no future plannings. It probably looks like that these workers that they're really poor, right? That they probably don't have a really high like income, meaning that they can only support like yourself like currently immediately and not instead in the future because workers don't have like this monthly check. They don't have these like monthly salaries, right? But on government side, we tell you that there will be monthly checks and requirements, that there would be predictable income because we're not making it as a part-time job. We're making it as a full-time job and not a gig economy. We're making it into full-time drivers or like taxi drivers or like food delivery people, right? We tell that this means that they have predictable income because now the company actually has like the incentive to say that, oh, I have to protect you, else it's like literally like against the laws, right? Thus it's probably going to be like very unstable on their side, and probably like when people and people could just lose jobs immediately. Thus, that since there's no safety nets, for example, during COVID-19 or like a war that brings like no electricity, then people just couldn't go immediately homeless. It's because in COVID, it's like no one really needs like taxi drivers because everyone's staying at home, right? No one really needs this anymore. As a result, it's more likely for them to go homeless and these vulnerable people staying more vulnerable. Reason three, we talked about how workers wouldn't become consistent consumers because they don't have any savings. It's unable to become consistently to give back to the economy. It's because that they can't consistently buy stuff. As a result, it's just going to be even worse for the economy. I think the impact here is on how it just directly harms the local economy from three aspects: workers, on how like they don't get like stable salaries, but also they get like really low salaries, but also to banks, since like workers aren't like there's no incentive for them to actually to save their money in banks, since like they don't have that many salaries and they don't have the capability of doing it. And I think three is just to corporations, since it harms like local corporations and since like all the money goes to like foreign industries. I think which leads to my second argument on worker rights. I think firstly on a micro level, it's just harder for workers to get together and to just fight for rights. It's because the workers are just more dispersed on their side of house. It's because that when there's just more people around, it's there's too many people around. Thus, it's very unlikely for you to know a lot of your colleagues, or just we're not enough to know each other. Thus, that there's just no community that for you to bond. And since everyone's just separated and isolated, then you can't really bond with people around you, right? It's probably less likely for you to like bond with them. Why? How does this change on our side? It's because one, that people just have generally more stable jobs, but two, it's because that the people now are actually in the same company and they are actually working together in like the same building, right? It probably looks like that you eat lunch with them together, right? It's because that right now you have an actually local corporation that is working at it. I think the impact here is that it's easy for companies to exploit because that you are vulnerable. But why doesn't this happen on our side? It's because workers now have leverage. They now have strikes to do it, right? They now have like the laws that could actually protect them. However, on their side of the house, worker never gain their rights, and they can just complete like keep on getting exploited by these foreign companies, which they would never get sued. That's proud to be on-side government.
So we believe that in a developing country, what the economy actually needs is they need this sort of short-term income so they can build on it, and from there they can go somewhere because these are the people they need this income in order to afford their basic necessities because they wouldn't have been able to get other jobs like more formal jobs otherwise. So now onto some quick rebuttals onto rebuttal on their main point. So first of all, they said that like these jobs are like really unstable. However, we said that they actually need to start somewhere in order for them to build up. They need these short-term sources of income. They need these like quick ways to earn money in order for them to be able to first of all live, to be able to like get the basic necessities they need like food and water and shelter, and from there then they can build up to get better jobs and more stable jobs. And if they don't start like in the comparative, if they're not able to start to get these experience on these small gig jobs and in this gig economy, then they wouldn't have been able to get that full-time formal job anyways because they wouldn't have the experience, they wouldn't have the ability, and like the quality would have been a lot worse. So the other like main point was that like during crashes for the economy, we don't need these workers. However, we actually say that in these crashes, there's still like lots of opportunities where we will still need them. So, for example, like they use the example of in COVID where we don't need like taxi drivers. However, we think that if you don't need taxi drivers, then okay, then maybe another opportunity comes up. Like for example, during COVID, probably more people are ordering like takeout order, or ordering groceries to be delivered to their homes, and thus you need more delivery drivers. So if one like source is compromised, then there's probably like another source that's taking the benefit somewhere. And we think that like it's like not realistic for during these crashes that all of these jobs would simply like not be like all these jobs would simply crash. We think that there would be still jobs that are like thriving more, and sure some jobs might die down a bit, but we think this gig economy is important for these people in order so that they can start somewhere and so that they can like build up from that. So some characterization and reframing. So first of all, we'd like to reframe like developing countries as countries that like they need this short-term income in order to improve, because like I've mentioned before, if they're not starting anywhere, they're not able to like get better jobs. These people like need to be able to like live, to be able to sustain themselves in order to improve. And we think that this is what these developing countries they need. They need this prominence of the gig economy in order so that their work is there. This can boost the economy in order so that these workers can have income, because like on the comparative this is not happening and they're not able to get like these jobs and they're not able to sustain themselves. Okay, so to look more deep into this, so what do like the people living in these developing country looks like? So we say that there's two sorts of people. one of which is heavily impacting, one of which doesn't really apply. So the first one is like the most common sort of people. They have like the largest scale, and this is the most common, and they don't have much education, and they need this money in order to survive because they don't have like all this experience or this education, and thus these gig jobs are a good way to quickly earn money for them. And this is in fact the only way they can quickly earn money and build on. They're also the second type of person are the people who like somehow like got this education, they have this experience, and we think they don't really apply because they never needed like these gig jobs in the first place. And we also characterize the economy in developing countries. We think that they are quite fragile, and we think that like for example like things like pandemics or natural disasters like touched on like that we already touched on like do have like a big impact on them. So that's why we think we need the gig economy in order to be boosting the economy, in order for people to actually be getting this income in the first place. So onto my main substantive argument about how the prominence of the gig economy is actually good for the economy in these developing countries. So why is this true? First of all, many of these countries have high unemployment rates currently. So the economy doesn't generate enough secure full-time jobs. There's not enough like full-time jobs that need to be full down or enough people that should be like going into these jobs. They just don't have as much of this. And also the people like the job candidates, the people that could be going into these full-time positions, there's a significantly less number because all of these people like lack these job experiences. All of these people need to start from somewhere, and without like a lot of education and a lot of wealth being easily accessed, a lot of these people don't have the experience and they don't have this ability in order to be going into these secure full-time positions. So a lot of like the sectors that are like where a lot of the sectors that they could like look into going into are typically quite slow growing, and they need something that's like a quick source of income for them to be able to sustain themselves. So they need to work, and they want and they need to work, but they can't find these jobs. So how do we solve this? So we solve this by having a prominence of the gig economy, because when gig jobs are introduced, what happens is unemployment decreases, and these people are able to apply for a gig job, they're able to apply for something that's so widespread because it's prominent. That means a lot of people need it. Like a lot of people need taxi drivers, a lot of people need these like takeaway services, a lot of people need them. So a lot of people are hired, which means that a lot of people are gaining experience, and thus there's less unemployment. And because experience and skills are being gained, that means that they can work on to get better jobs, as my next speaker will like touch on. And also what happens is, as looking from a bigger perspective, is that the income starts flowing into the economy, because when more money is earned, then more money is being spent, and there's a multiplier effect, which means that the economy is able to thrive and is able to better sustain itself and to be in less risk of collapsing, or so it's to be less fragile and to be in less risk of collapsing. So local businesses and the economy as a whole will be growing because of this gig economy providing quick sources of income. And why is this important? So this is important because this is affecting like many people's lives. This is affecting like all people, including the minorities, including the people who are of lower SES, including the people who like might have a harder time finding these formal jobs, which we think in developing countries this is actually more common. This is like most of the population. And what does this mean? This means that they're able to afford these basic necessities. They're able to afford food, they're able to afford water, they're able to sustain themselves, and this prevents long-term unemployment because they're able to have like this short-term gig job to earn the experience, which they can then build on, or they can stay on this until they find some stable footing for themselves. So what also happens on like a bigger perspective is that there's a more flexible working options and more flexible working hours for these people, because these gig economy jobs, they're like so varied and they're flexible and they're short term and they're able to provide quick sources of money. These people have more control over like when they work, how they work, and being more flexible allows them to like do other jobs and to be able to sustain themselves better because of these flexible working hours. Now, looking onto a bigger perspective, there's a more stable society and economy as more money is coming in. And we think that we think that as a whole, without this gig economy and without the prominence of these gig jobs, that this economy wasn't able to like start up, especially in a place like developing countries where the economy is already really fragile. So therefore, we believe that the gig economy is necessary in order for these people to start, in order for these people to improve the basic necessities and for them to be able to grow and get better jobs, and as well as for the economy to grow. Thank you.
I believe opposition came up and misquoted and misunderstood a lot of my prime minister's arguments. So to start my speech, I will start to clarify OG's stance on this entire debate, then move on to rebut and weigh what OO brings into this debate. First of all, what does our PM tell you? Elisa tells you two main things in this debate. First of all, about workers' rights. We say three things in this thing. First of all, we say that it is easier for workers to strike for higher pay, equal working hours, or just generally more fair and healthy conditions. Because when people are together in a community, it's easier for them to build on each other. It's easier for them to support each other and build a support chain that then can make them have the consequence or even have simply the leverage over these companies in order to build up the power to strike and ask for bargaining power. And the gig economy, however, does not bring forth this sort of benefits. These Uber drivers or these other delivery drivers are completely isolated and rarely get the chance to interact with other Uber drivers, which makes it significantly harder for these gig economy workers to protest and advocate for their own rights. And recognize that gig economy workers are likely also just lower poor class, which also accesses poor people, Judge. And so our alternative solves this in multiple folds, three main reasons. First of all, we supply them with lots of leverage. Second of all, we give them multiple future planning. And third of all, we give them insurance. And so second of all, why do we think that workers' rights is also helping on our side, as Elisa explained? Why are there no workers in the gig economy simply have no savings? This is because the gig economy includes no contract, no insurance, and simply no safety net whatsoever. This means that the workers have to pay for healthcare, insurance, or just whatever bills or whatever injury they get, which is a lot of these gig economy works are very dangerous. They have to pay for albums by themselves out of their pocket and recognize that these gig economy workers already work at a minimum wage, meaning that the amount of money they actually get at the end of the day in their own pockets is very, very minimal. Thirdly, recognize that they have no stable monthly income, which makes it significantly harder for these poor lower class gig economy workers to future plan. This means they're very vulnerable to they're unable to predict salary. They mean that they are unable to know how much they can allocate to needs and savings, which looks like retirement, children, or simply how much they're going to do in the next year or even the next month. Or how much they can spend on groceries. This is extremely devastating for the quality of a worker's life and just how their autonomy or how their life is going to function. Then Elisa told you the second thing about economy and how the economy is going down through the gig economy. Four main reasons here. First, recognize that most gig economy jobs are based in foreign companies. For example, Uber. That means that the money or the revenue is going directly to these foreign nations. Second of all, recognize that gig economy workers have no savings, as I mentioned before. That means any slight economic instability, which developing nations just face the fact have very often, will cause absolute crises like homelessness and to become extremely prominent. And then it is the government's duty to solve the homelessness because it is obviously a crisis and causes lots of issues. And this, to solve homelessness or create welfare programs to mitigate this, governments will have to allocate large amounts of money, which is very, very expensive, and it just overall does actually detriment the developing nation's economy rather than help it. Thirdly, recognize that because workers work paycheck to paycheck, that means they're unable to give back to the local economy. Also because they are unable to predict how much they can buy or how much they can consume in goods. That means that they are unable to give back to the local economy. They cannot be consistent consumers of goods. And so gig economy workers really just don't give any big give back or help the economy in any way. Fourthly, recognize that banks refuse to loan to people with unstable jobs, and if a decent amount of the population is working gig economy jobs, that means the bank is unable to generate large amounts of revenue from this either. So, Judge, what are the impacts of this? Twofold, right? First of all, recognize it harms the local economy. Developing nations are never growing, and local banks don't get support and no service and no savings from workers. Second of all, recognize that workers' rights are just increasingly harmed, and workers are most likely to be poor people from the lower class, and this is just extremely harmed. And so, Judge, to weigh the clash about poor people or just overall who helps poor people, we have to look at OO's case. OO claims two things. First of all, they claim that you can start from these gig economies to help as a jumping board, and second of all, you can help on their side with the gig economy, you can help poor people. Why do you think this is untrue? Four main reasons. First of all, recognize to talk about their jumping board argument. A lot of these developing nations have a prominence of jobs that do not need prerequisites of experience or education. Think fast foods like McDonald's, KFC, and etc. Think infrastructure workers. Think drivers and etc. Right, Josh? These jobs need massive amounts of people to be working on them, but it also does not need literally any prerequisite. Think in America, a 16-year-old can America is a developed nation, but it's still you can think about it. Like underage people under the age of 16 can be working at fast foods as waitresses or waiters and etc. Right, Judge? These just because they're full-time jobs does not mean that they're irrelevant or cannot work as a jumping board for these people for experience. And so like we can without the gig economy, you can still access the same points that OO claims about jumping boards and further experience for future jobs. Second of all, Judge, recognize that OO doesn't really explain how the gig economy is like unique to solve or supply young people experience. This is exactly the loophole that I took to prove my previous point. They simply state, here's an issue, young people need experience, but they don't claim how the gig economy is uniquely the one to solve this. Thirdly, recognize, Judge, talking about poor people, this is a slight clash I'm going to weigh right now. Judge, we believe that the gig economy actually hurts poor people more for three main reasons. First of all, as I said before, they have literally no safety net. Any minor or major economic crisis will absolutely crumble them. And second of all, recognize they have no leverage or bargaining power over unfair conditions because they're just so separated and they're designed to be separated as the unique characterization of a gig economy is. And thirdly, recognize that they're unable to plan or save for the future. And this is detrimental for a lower class citizen because they need that planning, they need that saving to step up totally to build up their quality of life for their children, also for their later years. So, Judge, that means that we flip OO's case about poor people and claim that they actually bring more harm, and by default, OG or government cases bring better benefits to poor people because of three main reasons. First of all, we supply by default leverage and bargain over these unfair conditions, so meaning giving them autonomy and certain freedoms. And second of all, we give insurance. Say if they get hurt or if they have any sort of things, they can have an insurance to build up and help each other. And thirdly, recognize that they're unlikely to get exploited by these companies anymore because they can stand up for themselves and they can work harder, and that means they can have savings and predictability, which is extremely important for a low class citizen. And for these reasons of lower class stability, of overall economic growth on the micro and the macro, OG brings to you the win. Thank you.
In a developing country where formal jobs are so rare and the majority of the population lacks education and work credentials, gig jobs or people going to gig jobs are literally the only alternative. Okay, let's first characterize what developing countries actually look like. I believe what opening government misses out on is that developing countries have a mass number of people. There are lots of people, but not enough jobs to support these other people. They have mass unemployment. They don't have enough people to go in and fill in jobs because they don't have enough jobs for this. This is because of one main reason. People in developing countries grow up without good quality education. They aren't able to get a good job, just study to be a medical worker or even just get a normal corporate job, an example. They don't have any credentials. They don't have any education to do this. And what does this mean? It means they aren't able to get any high paying job they want. They aren't able to find any other job alternative. Gig job working or laborers jobs are the only option. But why is a gig job worker actually just better than any other laborer's job out there? What is so special about gig job workers is that you need a lot of them compared to a street vendor or any other laborer's job such as a farmer or a cleaner. The number that you need are very limited. People don't need this anymore. You can easily have AI replace this. You don't need that many people. And secondly, these jobs also make you need to work very long hours, such as being a street vendor or just selling products at a grocery store. It probably means you have to work from 7 to 12 hours a day. But what is special to a gig economy job? It means that you can work fewer hours, you're still able to get the same pay for per hour of the job that you do. It also means lots of people need these use these gig economy jobs because right now lots of people are ordering online. When our economy is growing, especially in developing countries, where many people use services that make you deliver things to make things more efficient, in a growing economy where things are trying to reach the maximum efficiency possibility, where things are delivered to your door as fast as possible, or where you want things delivered or whatever you want delivered to your doorstep, gig economy jobs are really prominent. I'll take a POI from closing. No POI from closing. I take it from the opening.
Isn't this the exact reason why you need our alternative and where our alternative comes in?
I don't I think your alternative is unrealistic because these people are never able to go into any other job because they don't have the education possible or they don't have the ability to go into any other job. And why is like us trying to like minimize unemployment so important in the status quo? It's because of two reasons. Firstly, when you have like unemployment, it means that you lose economic output and you get lots of people that are like going to poverty or going to like hunger. And developing countries, that means they no longer can grow because they don't have the money to support like education or healthcare. And when people are continuously unemployed, it is like far much worse than if they were to be like a gig job worker and at least earn like minimal income or an income that can like maybe like feed them or buy them a bit of food to eat. It's still much better than the comparative of being like unemployed. I also believe that what now I'm going to go into like direct rebuttal on like the opening government. Firstly, they said that they don't have like good work economics. Gig job workers don't have like good maintenance. I believe like the comparative is like much worse. Firstly, they're unemployed, they don't have any job. Secondly, I believe that gig job actually has like some level of like stability within the company because the company is so large and because the company works like primarily online. You're able to get like lots of social awareness or like attention if you're being mistreated in the status quo. Secondly, I believe that they just take how gig job workers don't have a stable income. I believe that we actually are able to rebut this by saying how when you become a gig job worker, it's usually probably when you're like in high school or like in college wanting to like support your family or parents, like you're doing this as an extra job or you're doing this as a second job to like give some money or output for your family. This probably means this isn't your only job and you're probably working many other jobs to support your family and income, or worst case scenario, this is your only job and you are only able to work as a gig economy. This probably means you don't have the education or ability to go find another job because if someone had the opportunity to find another job, they probably wouldn't be working at a gig economy job. I'll take your point.
Why do you need education for McDonald's? Please engage with our examples that DPM pointed out, and you have like bargain, and you can like bargain about working hours, right?
The problem with McDonald's workers' job, I've already explained, is they're very limited. The number of McDonald's workers or McDonald's jobs that you need is not enough for the number of people that are unemployed in the status quo. Secondly, McDonald's job probably means you need to work like much longer hours than you need to do for a gig economy job. It probably means you have to go to a specific place. Probably is not as flexible as a gig economy job. And now I'm going to go to my first point on how you're probably able to use this to like build for like a better job. I believe in a gig economy job, you're able to get like experience, you're able to know about time management, you're able to know about customer service because things like working or ratings or tips exist in the status quo, which means that you get like work experience and you get to do this, especially when you're like in high school. And what this means, it means that you can build on from this in the future. It means that you can maybe get like experience with like working as a customer service and you can maybe become like a manager of a small corporate company, or you might have like some work experience or might have saved up enough money to like invest in something that might give you a better job. Or secondly, the worst case scenario is that they don't move on, but now you at least are able to earn some money to support your family. You're able to earn some money in college or high school to help other people out. And I also believe that they say that gig economy jobs are worse for poor people and the economy, and I think we're just able to like flip this. It's because like if there were to be a disaster, you probably need gig economy jobs even more because you need people to be able to like transfer like medication. You need people to be able to like transport things over and over again. But instead, like a corporate or like a McDonald's worker job, you probably close down during things like COVID, or probably close down during like a natural disaster. So gig economy jobs are actually much better. And what we also believe, so what should you believe at the end of this debate? I think you should believe, firstly, that in the status quo, if you're going to get a gig economy job, it probably means you're unable to go and get any other job because your education level or your credentials are simply not good enough. So your only options are to work as a gig employee or to be unemployed, and to have like that minimal pay is always going to be better than nothing. And that is why I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.
Judge, I think the question for this debate is not whether which side can prove that their side would be able to give jobs to workers that need it most, but instead whether they exploit their workers or not. So before moving forward, I'll be addressing on what I'll be speaking on today. So firstly, about our identity, then moving on to our stance, then on to my rebuttals, and lastly, my one and only argument. So firstly, let me address the reason on why we're different from our opening half. Judge, the reason is because of two things. Firstly, OG kept on saying that drivers are being exploited because they're not local because they're not local, and that the gig economy helps developing nations by providing jobs. But we say that while this is true, it's not the most important issue to prioritize. The money may go to like foreign companies, and even if some like income reaches workers, it does very little social protections or like sustainable development. The reason why this argument is that we should is because on their side they're focusing on like a relatively minor benefit. Whereas on our side, we would prioritize structural security and worker well-being because these creates real lasting changes for developing countries. The reason why we say this is because temporary or small-scale income gains cannot outweigh the systematic harm of exploitation, financial instability, and lack of protections inherent in the gig economy, which I'll explain further in my arguments. Now, moving on to OO Bench's case. OO kept mentioning that, claiming that gig economy jobs are the only way people in developing nations can make money or access a stable employment, so you could use that as a stepping stone to get a better job. But this is just out of assumption, because how do you know that when they leave after their gig job, they would get like a better job with even more experience, even if they have more experience? We say that this isn't true because what they prioritize, suppose like the necessity of gig work is actually very limited in like scope and does little to address the real economic insecurity. So it shouldn't be taken as like something that's a significant justification. The reason why we say this is because there are other opportunities in the formal sector, small businesses, and even traditional employment that provides better stability, benefits, and long-term security than gig work. Meaning the argument that gig jobs are indispensable and is exaggerated and misleading. So in conclusion, the reason why our identity is the most important is because it frames the debate. It is about like of what impacts actually truly matter, while the opposition focuses on their minor benefits like short-term income or the idea that gig work actually helps developing countries. We are prioritizing the long-term stability, security, and protection of these workers, which affects not just the individuals but families, communities, and the overall economy. So panels, after all this, it's clear on what side proposition stance is. We believe that the prominence of the gig does more harm than good because it creates a systematic exploitation, financial instability, social economic harm that outweigh the short-term flexibility or income opportunities that it provides. So now moving on to my rebuttal. Opposite, like OO Bench claimed that gig jobs has some stability because the company is because the company is so big. But we tell you that any perceived stability from any big like gig companies is superficial and unreliable. Even if such a platform is so large, workers are still classified as an independent contractor, meaning that they can be like deactivated, have their pay reduced, or lost access to work at any time. This company size doesn't like guarantee at all regular income, benefits, or protection, or the stability they claim is minimal compared to like formal employment, and it doesn't address the structural risk and financial insecurity that workers face in developing countries. And finally, I'll be moving on to my one argument about how the gig economy exploits workers and undermines their financial security. Let me explain further before opposition comes up here and says like, oh, in developing countries, one of the things that differentiates them between developed countries is that they don't have a good economy. So basically, it's a good solution for that. But we say that it isn't true. Two layers on this then. Firstly, the gig economy creates the unstable income for workers in developing countries. Many rely on app-based platforms such as ride-hailing or delivery services such as Uber as their primary source of income. However, their earnings fluctuate daily, depending on demand, like how much people choose to buy that day, or platform algorithm changes, and even the weather. Like e.g., people know that when it's raining hard, and since they live in developing countries, it's not always guaranteed that their roads are going to be made well either. Might not order because they might not find a driver for their food, or it might take too long for the order to be processed, or even penalties imposed by the company. So for instance, a delivery driver in Indonesia or India or Malaysia may spend 10 to 12 hours a day just working, yet still struggle to earn enough to cover for. Without these guaranteed wages, workers often have to live in paycheck to paycheck, leaving them vulnerable to economic shocks, illness, or even emergencies. And secondly, then, the actual structural design of gig platforms creates a power imbalance favoring companies over their workers. Platforms control pay rates, account access, and job allocation algorithms, meaning that their workers have little to no influence on basically how they earn. For example, a driver's account can be deactivated without the explanation, cutting off their income entirely. So this concentration allows platforms to shift economic risk onto the most vulnerable actors while maximizing profits for investors and owners. In addition, panels, the informal nature of gig work limits the workers' ability to organize or advocate for better conditions. Without the union representation or these formal contracts, collective bargaining is nearly impossible for them. Attempts to demand fair pay or labor protections are often ignored or suppressed by the platform. This systematic exploitation ensures that the workers remain financially precarious while these companies benefit from cheap flexible labor. So the freedom of gig work is therefore misleading. It just masks the structural vulnerability and entrenches inequality more. So some weighing, Judge, the reason why this argument matters more than the opening half is because we showed you how the gig economy doesn't just prove flexible work, it systematically exploits these workers, undermines their financial security, and shifts risk onto the most vulnerable actors, meaning the harms are structural and widespread, while the benefits touted by the opening government are temporary, superficials, and fails to address the long-term well-being. That is why I'm so proud to propose. Thank you.
So the gig economy is often painted as unstable, exploitative, or temporary, and the proposition leans heavily on the assumption that developing countries would be better off without it. But this framing is deeply flawed because it ignores the lived reality of millions of people in these countries who struggle to find any employment at all. And the motion asks whether the gig economy does more harm than good, and our answer is a firm no. Because the alternative to gig work is not perfect jobs, it's unemployment, poverty, and exclusion from the formal economy. So in developing countries, formal employment opportunities are extremely limited. So large local companies cannot absorb the growing labor force, and public sector jobs are scarce and competitive. And in such cases, in such contexts, the gig economy acts as a critical safety net, allowing individuals to earn income, support their families, and survive. And the idea that gig work exploits people must be weighed against the stark reality that without it, these workers might have no source of income at all. And moreover, the gig economy promotes flexibility, agency, and resilience because workers can choose when, where, and how to work, allowing them to balance family responsibilities, education, and other commitments. And in societies where rigid 9 to 5 hour work is inaccessible, flexibility is not a luxury, but it's a necessity. So we also recognize concerns about stability, long-term income, and worker protections, but harm must be evaluated comparatively, not absolutely. So even if gig workers face some income problems, their standard of living is often higher than it would be without gig opportunities, and many workers would use these jobs as stepping stones toward greater financial independence. And finally, this debate is about the realistic solutions for developing countries, not idealized economies. And our task is to examine whether the gig economy leaves people worse off compared to the realistic alternatives available. So in that context, the gig economy clearly provides more good than harm, empowering individuals and promoting economic.
Hello. Sorry. Is it just me or the speaker was cut off?
Yes, I think she's cut out.
Alright.
Yeah, same here.
Hello. Is the teammate here? Maybe the. Alright.
Oh,
Hello.
okay, sorry. The gig economy.
Alright.
Hello.
I paused at the second minute of the speech.
Okay.
Alright.
I'll just start where I ended my speech at the model. So starting in 3, 2, 1. So the gig economy is not a luxury, but it's a practical solution that provides employment where none exists. And our model assumes that individuals are rational actors who choose gig work because it's the best available option for immediate income. And providing cash flow, skill development, and market access, gig platforms enable workers to meet essential needs and gradually improve their economic position. So we also model the gig economy as a complementary to and not a replacement for traditional employment. So while large companies and formal sectors are ideal, they cannot scale quickly enough to absorb growing labor forces. And gig work fills in this gap because they provide temporary stability and flexibility until more permanent options are available. So finally, we emphasize agency, inclusion, and skill building because gig work allows marginalized populations like women, youth, and rural communities to participate in the economy. So some rebuttals against the other teams. So the OG said that foreign companies and something about foreign companies and income leakage, but OG argues that gig work often benefits foreign companies rather than local workers. But this ignores that the workers still receive immediate income, which is often their only source of survival. So even if companies profit, workers gain cash in hand and market access. Those are outcomes that would be impossible without these platforms. the OO also said that there's like the OO focuses on short-term income as like justification, arguing gig work is like temporary, but you accept that it is short-term, but this is precisely why it is effective in developing countries, because it provides immediate relief and prevents extreme poverty, right? Which formal jobs cannot do at any scale. So they also said something about economic fragility, but they claim like gig work strengthens the economy and stability. So we agree, but add that this is exactly why the motion fails. So gig work injects cash, supports consumption, and connects workers to larger markets and outcomes OG claims formal employment alone can provide, but which is really unrealistic in these economies. So our first argument is about how the gig economy expands economic access and reduces poverty. So traditional employment in developing countries often requires like formal education certifications or prior experience, all of which are like scarce for large segments of the population, right? So the gig economy bypasses these barriers by allowing almost everyone to participate with minimal prerequisites, like for instance, a smartphone or like a bicycle, right? And this inclusivity ensures that even individuals who are like unskilled or undereducated can begin learning or earning immediately, which is essential for like in economies with high unemployment. And second, women, youth, and the elderly, people with like disabilities and like rural populations face systemic exclusion in conventional labor markets. So like gig work through like flexible hours and remote options enables these groups to enter the economy, right? So some impacts of this argument is about how the even modest income from gig work allows households to like meet essential needs like food, housing, water, and electricity. So the cumulative effect of millions participating in the gig work lifts entire communities over the poverty line, something formal jobs cannot accomplish at the same scale and speed. There's also improved health and education because with additional income, families can afford healthcare, vaccinations, and nutrition, reducing preventable illnesses and like improving like overall well-being, which creates like a long-term generational impact by like increasing literacy skills or like employability. So our second argument, no thank you, is about the gig economy, building skills, agency, and long-term mobility. So gig work teaches like transferable skills, including customer service, time management, and navigation, and communication. And these skills enhance worker employability in multiple sectors. So workers learning to manage schedules, optimize earnings, and adapt to like demand, like food, and adapt to like demands in the world. And this develops an entrepreneurial like instincts, which are critical for self-employment or business creation. And third, there's performance and like feedback systems. So platforms like provide ratings, reviews, and client feedback, and workers learn to improve quality, reliability, and efficiency, building reputations that translate to higher pay and better opportunities. So what is the impact of this argument? So skills gained through gig work improve the chances of like moving into formal employment or like starting entrepreneurial ventures because workers are not like trapped, but they gain like a pathway to like upward mobility. And earnings allow individuals to support themselves and their families, reducing dependence on like exploitative employers, or like relatives or government support. So what's the comparative here? So gig work, while the OG emphasizes like exploitation, gig work is a platform for growth, not a trap, and it builds the skills and experience necessary for better opportunities. And without gig work, marginalized populations have like minimal avenues for like skill development, entrepreneurship, or financial independence. And finally, formal jobs often impose like rigid structures. So gig work empowers individuals to control their earning strategies, fostering like long-term capability and confidence. So proud to
Because when we step back from the individual arguments in this round, what matters is how this model shapes the lives of the workers over time, not just what it offers at the point of entry. That is where the real clash in this debate lies. As government whip, I will do three things in this speech. First, I will identify the most important concepts that decide this debate. Second, I'll explain why side government wins on those concepts. And third, and finally of all, I will deal with the extension brought in by closing opposition and show why it does not outweigh our case. At a higher level, this debate is evaluated across two main priorities. First, what kind of labor system does this gig economy actually create for workers in developing countries? And second, whether the flexibility opposition celebrates meaningfully outweighs the structural harms we've shown. Now, onto the first important impact of this debate, the nature of the work created by the gig economy. On government, we told you that the gig economy does not simply provide jobs. A key feature of these gigs is that it's structured work into short-term, often unstable arrangements. This matters because it is what uniquely creates a steeply top-down dynamic, also known as information asymmetry in economics. So this looks like workers heavily relying on the platform for access to jobs, for how much they are paid, and for whether they get to continue receiving work at all. They do not know how jobs are distributed or how the system evaluates them, while the platform retains full control over both. To sum up, the gig economy creates an environment where workers can be easily replaced and have little control over their conditions. Opposition tells you that in developing countries where access to higher education is limited, gig work can still be valuable because it provides low barrier entry into employment, but this argument misses the point entirely. The problem is not whether people can enter the job, but what happens to them once they are inside of it. Their benefit of accessibility does not negate the brutal exploitation within the gig economy. Why side government wins in this regard in the nature of work and worker rights is because we do not just look at whether jobs are created, but what those jobs actually mean in the long term. In developing countries where financial safety nets are limited for a majority of low-income workers, the instability that comes with the gig economy directly affects whether individuals can plan ahead or try to improve their situation. We gave you structural analysis in our opening speeches that has not been responded to yet about how companies that provide these gig jobs externalize risk onto workers. Income fluctuations, lack of benefits, and algorithmic control were all features that we mentioned, and they are not accidental. They are built into the model given its short-term structural design. So even if opposition is correct that gig economies provide access, that access leads into a system where workers are structurally disadvantaged. The lack of higher education does not justify placing individuals into arrangements where they have little control, limited transparency, and no meaningful economic path to improve their conditions. The second question in this debate is whether the flexibility opposition celebrates meaningfully outweighs the structural harm of this model, or in short, the impact of this motion on the broader economy. LO has once again pushed opposition's claims that gig work increases participation and allows more people to earn, especially in contexts where formal jobs are limited. But this argument again fundamentally falls apart because they have yet to prove that short-term participation can immediately translate to long-term economic strength. Side government wins on the broader economy because the gig economy is not just imperfect. It is possibly one of the worst models for long-term growth given the features we have already identified. One, it concentrates labor into roles that do not build skills over time. And two, it operates through systems where workers have little visibility or control over how value is generated. When large segments of the workforce are locked into this kind of work, productivity will stagnate because there is no incentive or pathway to move into a higher value job or activity. To quote opposition, there is no building up on unskilled experience in a cycle of economic stagnation. This distinction especially matters at the national level. Developing economies rely on gradually shifting labor into more specialized and productive sectors. But the gig economy interrupts that process by absorbing workers into roles that are easy to enter but difficult to progress from. As a result, economic activity as it is remains shallow and growth becomes harder to sustain in the long term. Furthermore, opposition's claim that the gig economy is beneficial simply because it boosts employment alone also does not carry the debate because the quality of that employment undermines its value. Increasing the number of people who are technically employed does not strengthen an economy if those jobs are unstable, low paying, and offer no pathway to improve one's situation. What you get instead is a workforce that remains financially insecure despite working consistently or constantly, which limits spending and weakens its developing countries' overall economic resilience. Any one of government's proposed alternatives during this debate are far better for developing economies because they prioritize both access and progression. Investment in labor-intensive public works or support for medium enterprises both allow for job creation in sectors where workers can not only move into more productive roles over time, but also gradually earn stable income, two areas where the gig economy fails. Judge, I will summarize this debate by regrouping it around one central priority in developing countries. Whether this economic model actually improves people's long-term livelihoods, not just their immediate access to income. Both sides in opening have reached a deadlock on this question, but with closing government's contributions, it is clear to see where this debate is won. What matters is the quality and structure of that work over time. On this, government's argument is clearly ahead in impact and practicality. On opposition, the debate is framed almost entirely around access. They tell you that the gig economy provides basic, quick entry into work for those with limited education or opportunities, but this only addresses the first step, not what work looks like over time. On government closing, we elaborated on our contributions around the quality and structural security of that work. We show that gig economies create instability, shift risk onto workers, and concentrates power through information asymmetry. This means that even when people manage to enter the system, they remain stuck in conditions that limit their ability to progress higher. I challenge side opposition to tell me, the most important stakeholders in this debate, the workers themselves, that being locked into unpredictable income and limited control over their work is an acceptable long-term outcome simply because it is accessible. Why side government wins is because in developing countries where social protections are weaker, the priority is not just employment, but sustainable and fair employment in the long term. A system that rapidly expands access while entrenching vulnerability and poverty in its citizens does more harm than good, which is why I'm so proud to propose. Thank you.
Like in the status quo, there are going to be developing countries. That is something we cannot change. But what we can do is argue that gig jobs do more harm, more good than harm. CEO is the only realistic side in this debate, and this is why we should retake the round. So let me rebut to second CG and first CG. So first they say that like they so first CG says that it creates systematic exploitation, but like to rebut to that, systematic exploitation already exists in developing countries and maybe even worse, right? Because informal sectors jobs have are like they have no contracts. There are no like wage guarantees and there's physical danger, right? And there's like zero accountability. So the thing is, even if the gig economy has problems, it is less intense than the alternative system that's like already like existing. The question isn't whether exploitation exists, but whether the system is comparatively better, and it clearly is, right? Workers in the world are trapped, and CEO is the only one who can break that up, like break that through, because gig economies are flexible. There's low commitment, and people can use multiple platforms, and there are more options. Okay, so second CT says that what kind of systems does this gig economy give? In short term and often unstable, right? But judge which side is more unstable in this case, right? Side government is more unstable because it is hard for like people to actually get jobs in developing countries. Like think about it, some income is better than none because I'll be elaborating later on. But then like in developing countries, it's hard to actually get like I don't know a job like lawyer or like doctor. I'm not like just like high payment jobs or like medium jobs, right? Some income is better than none. Instability is more likely to happen on side gov. Okay, so they talk about how like does flexibility out how does wait they say like does flexibility outweigh the structural harm of this model? Well, flexibility will outweigh flexibility will outweigh because like one the gig economy has more flexible times, right? Like those working as like moms, parents, students can choose like or like who have like other jobs at the same time, they can choose what time they work in, and they're the ones who will like make money in their family because like they're like young and stuff, right? Two, people don't need a lot of experience nor a degree to get these jobs, but this will still give them enough like income to supplement other earnings, right? They say like so CG frames gig work as unstable, but this is only true relative to formal employment, which is largely inaccessible in developing countries. In reality, the alternative for most workers is no income, informal labor or dangerous work, like all of which are less stable and far more harmful. Like even with fluctuations, gig work provides consistent daily or weekly earning potential, which is a tangible form of stability. I'll like rebuild and like weigh the case. Like so our first speaker, like she talks about how like we're expanding economic
Point.
access and reduces poverty, right? And then she also talks about like the long-term mobility. So and then to repeat our case, the gig economy does more good in developing countries and our world sectors are limited, we like faced with limited requirements. Like we face with like it's like faced with limited requirements, and we have alternatives that require little education and starting entry, right? With what our first speaker imposed, we are talking about the future, right? First gig economies are better because the world side gov imposes is just simply not realistic. They think only about the impact and the fact that people will have better jobs, but they don't think about the process itself, right? Judge, in a developing country, it isn't realistic that people can just get high payment jobs because one, they don't even have good enough education, and like schools aren't just good enough and there's no tutors or like academies or such, right? So it's hard to get a degree or like something or like
POI.
have enough experience to qualify for those jobs. I'll be taking your POI.
Judge, please note that every single bench, including CO, ignored our arguments and only engaged with foreign control. Please engage with our arguments and impacts about bank stability, leverage, and economic contribution.
So like you talk about like economic contribution, right? But if I had to weigh from like both sides, the economy is gonna be better on our side because, like I said multiple times in my speech, like we're having like at least some income where you guys are like risking the entire income when the chances for you guys actually getting good jobs and like high payment jobs are low. Okay, moving on. Okay, let me refute to OG. So they talk like let me quickly refute back to OG. So they talk about how it's like just worse for the economy. The majority of the income goes to the company, right? But to like rebut to that, many workers come from unemployment and an informal sector. That means that there are like a higher chance of them like not getting employed at all because realistically their side is going to be unstable because it's unlikely that people in developing countries get paying jobs, right? It's better for them to get just like gig jobs that don't require degrees or that require minimal experience. And even if what they say is true, like that happens in all industries. Like the money they earn, it's obviously gonna go to companies. It's not just gig jobs, and they're creating a stereotype in this debate right now, and it'll happen anyways. But our side is large, like clearly better because like we have more chances and possibilities to actually get some sort of income, right? So now let me weigh on like like they say it's actually good for the economy and they don't have like full-time jobs, right? Okay, just we agree with them and they have like good points, right? But so here's why we win over the opening bench, right? One, opening is focusing more on like the short term and the short term income, right? But we're focused more on the long term, like our previous like our like first speaker said, like they're focusing more on long term empowerment and mobility, right? We talk about how it changes their future prospects and not their direct income because we have more like transition to better jobs, have more entry into formal and digital economy, right? Secondly, without gig platforms, people just go back to worse informal jobs and structural inequality remains anyway on their side, right? So we're not just repeating what they say. We agree with the impact they have, but like what they don't do and what we do is we think through the long-term effects and the future of citizens because that is an impact that shapes this debate as well. Judge CO clearly explains why gig economies are needed and crucial for developing countries, right? For these reasons, I've never been more than proud to oppose.